At this point, I would like to connect the materials we have recently been considering with things we learned earlier in the course about the unhealthy behaviors that lead to decreased adult well-being for those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. To do this, I would like to look again at the study by Luby and colleagues covered in the previous lecture about the association between experiencing early childhood adversity and one's level of cognitive functioning that is based in the hippocampus. As described in the previous lecture, the researchers found that as a young child, children from lower income families were more likely to experience hostile parenting as well as other stressful life events. They also found that each of these measures was independently associated with reduced hippocampal volume. However, after taking these experiences into account, there was no direct association between family income and hippocampal volume. As a consequence, these children can be expected to exhibit weaker executive functioning and lower cognitive abilities when they get to be school age. Noble and colleagues studied these associations in a group of 60 African American kindergarten children in Philadelphia, drawn from both lower SES families and middle SES families. They found significant associations between the SES of the family the child grew up in and their language ability and level of executive functioning, with weaker but still significant associations between family SES and other cognitive functions such as visual skills and memory. In 2007, Noble and colleagues published the results of a second study, this one looking at 168 racially diverse first graders in New York City, representing a range of family SES background. As in their study of kindergartners, they found significant associations between family SES and executive function, language ability, and visual spatial skills, with a weaker association with memory. I would like to connect these studies to a study published by Portilla and colleagues in 2014. They were able to study 338 5-year-old children from diverse SES and racial ethnic backgrounds. Shortly after the child had first entered kindergarten, they were able to assess each child based upon the child's level of impulsivity and inattention. They followed the child throughout kindergarten in order to also to measure their level of school engagement and academic competence. Separately, they asked the teacher of each child to evaluate their perception of the teacher-child relationship and whether the teacher viewed that relationship as conflictual. The researchers found that those students who, upon entry into kindergarten, showed greater levels of impulsivity and inattention, both measures of executive functioning, also had greater levels of conflict with their teacher as perceived by the teacher. Perhaps not surprisingly, boys exhibited greater levels of impulsivity and inattention than girls, and as they followed the students throughout the kindergarten year, they found that the students with greater impulsivity and inattention exhibited less engagement in school activities. When they then assessed these children in first grade, they found that the kindergarten teacher's assessment of the level of conflict with that child predicted the first grade teacher's perception of the level of conflict with the child. They also found that those children who, as kindergartners, exhibited less school engagement and more conflict with the teacher also demonstrated lower levels of academic competence in first grade. Bogart and colleagues published a study in 2013 using data from a sample of more than 5,000 fifth grade students from several large cities. They looked at behaviors such as aggression, retaliatory behavior, and delinquency. In addition to family SES, they also assessed the extent to which the child had perceived experiencing racial discrimination. This chart compares the results from the black students and the white students in the study. Without controlling for SES or the experience of discrimination, they found a consistent pattern of more frequent problematic behaviors among the black students as compared to the white students. When they then took into account family SES, the racial difference in behavioral patterns were diminished substantially. And when they then also controlled for the experience of having experienced racial discrimination, the differences in behaviors were reduced to substantially smaller levels. In comparing white students to Latino students, they found the Latino students overall to exhibit more aggressive and retaliatory behaviors. However, when they then controlled for SES and the experience of discrimination, the Latino students actually showed lower levels of these behaviors, as well as significantly lower levels of delinquency. In 2014, New York Times columnist David Brooks wrote a piece he titled "The Character Factory," which discussed the importance of helping young children develop positive character traits while in school. As he described, measures of drive and self-control influence academic achievement roughly as much as cognitive skills. Poorer children grow up with more stress and more disruption, and these disadvantages produce effects on the brain. He then went on to discuss the ways we as a society have approached the disadvantage many young children from lower SES families face when they enter school. He wrote that the problem is that policies that ignore character and behavior have produced disappointing results. If you can't help people become more resilient, conscientious, or prudent, then all the cash transfers in the world will not produce permanent benefits. I hope you will share my view that Brooks has identified a crucial issue in our understanding of the factors that contribute to a child's success in the early school experience. In 2007, Hansen and Chen published results of their review of a range of articles published between 1970 and 2007 that addressed how growing up in a lower SES family is then also reflected in behaviors adopted as an adolescent. The specific adolescent behaviors they looked at were cigarette smoking, diet, exercise, and the use of alcohol or marijuana. From their combined analysis of these studies, they were able to determine that lower SES children as adolescents were more likely to have worse dietary behaviors, lower levels of physical activity, and greater levels of cigarette smoking. They found no clear pattern of childhood SES and the use of either alcohol or marijuana as an adolescent. At this point, I would like to look at what overall patterns we have observed in the ways children from lower SES families experience childhood and experience school, and what types of behaviors they begin to adopt as adolescents. We have seen clear evidence that children raised in lower SES families experience more stress in the critical period from birth through entering school. Children who experience more stress throughout this critical period are also more likely to develop weaker cognitive functioning, as well as decreased impulse control. When they get to kindergarten, the consequences of these stressful early childhood experiences begin to become apparent. Children from lower SES families exhibit weaker language skills, weaker executive control, and lower levels of other cognitive functions. The lower SES children, especially the boys, also tend to exhibit more impulsivity and inattention during school, resulting in conflict with the teacher and decreased engagement in the process of learning. As a consequence, when they enter first grade, the lower SES children also demonstrate lower academic competence and continued patterns of conflict with the teacher. When these children from lower SES families enter adolescence, moving on to middle school and high school, they also begin to demonstrate clear patterns of worse health-related behaviors. Specifically, these children are more likely to smoke as adolescents, more likely to have poor dietary behavior, and are less likely to get regular exercise. From data we have discussed earlier in the course, they are also less likely to attend college and less likely to graduate from college, both of which are associated with the level of well-being experienced throughout adulthood.